Did you keep at Gitmo? Did you keep a file with all your legal research in it?
I don't know if someone would have kept it 6 years later.
But did you have one?
At the time, yes, it was on. It was on a shared CIPRNet, a secured network.
And you don't know if that's been provided to the committee?
I would have no idea. I left Gitmo in 2003.
Thank you.
But I provided the basis for it in the opinion, so you would have seen citations to the various things that I looked at.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Pryor. Senator Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank this panel for their contribution to this very serious issue. I'd like to address my questions to Admiral Dalton. First, may I congratulate you on a very distinguished career in the United States Navy, and to have, as a consequence of your professional abilities, recognized and were given the first flag rank in the long history of the Navy JAG Corps. Am I not correct?
Yes, sir, for a woman, yes, sir.
That's a great commendation to you. I listened very carefully to your testimony today, and I'd like to start off by referring to the Vanity Fair article, which I presume you've read more than once. And on page 13 of the 17 pages, at the level of the Joint Chiefs, the memo should have been subject to a detailed review, including close legal scrutiny by Myers' own counsel, Captain Jane Dalton. But that never happened. It seems that Jim Haynes short-circuited the approval process. Albert Mora, the General Counsel of the Navy, says he remembered Dalton telling him, quote, "Jim pulled us away. We never had a chance to complete the assessment," end quote. Now, having spent some wonderful years myself in that building, in the Department of Navy, I've always found historically, going back to times of George Washington, we have civilian control of the military, and that's the way it should be. And it has functioned and functioned well throughout the history of our country. But within that structure, there's a certain amount of independence that's accorded the chiefs of the various military branch, Chief of Naval Operations, and so forth. And then when we structured the JCS organization and the chairman was designated, he was sort of the focal point of the chiefs. And his responsibility as the chief military advisor to the Secretary of Defense and the President. What interests me is the degree to which the chiefs at that time exercised their independence. This committee, and I was privileged to be a part of the committee and very active in writing Goldwater Nichols. And that was the law at the time this situation occurred. And that gave an avenue by which members of the JCS, indeed the chairman, if they had disagreements with certain policy matters, could address them directly to SecDef and, if necessary, to the President. You're familiar with that procedure. Have I stated it correctly?
Yes, sir.
Was any consideration given at that time by the senior military, either the chairman or members of the tank, to exercise the rights under Goldwater Nichols to bring to the attention of higher authority their concerns about this policy change?
Senator, I'm not sure what policy change.
Well, the use of more aggressive techniques for the detainees at Gitmo. The memorandum that we've been discussing here in some detail.
Yes, sir.
In other words, this article, and I think you've confirmed it's correct, you stopped your analysis, which you were doing for the chairman and at that time, Richard Myers. Am I correct?
Yes, Senator.
All right. Now, to me, that was a variance in normal procedures, and the chairman was entitled to the benefit of your professional expertise and knowledge and your own independent legal analysis. He had, I think, a duty, a chief, to go into the tank and discuss it. Was it ever discussed in the tank?
Senator, let me just clarify. When the memo came in from General Hill asking for the enhanced techniques, the memo was distributed to the services, and the services, as has already been mentioned, provided their inputs.
Correct.
They asked for, the services...
Now, the they being the services asked for.
That's...
I want to
Yes,
define
sir.
who they is.
I'm sorry. Yes, sir. The services sent in responses to the Joint Staff tasker asking for inputs on the General
Correct.
Hill memo. All of the services expressed concerns about the techniques that were listed in the memo. They also expressed their understanding and appreciation for the need for intelligence and good intelligence.
Correct.
And then my recollection is that all four of them suggested that there needed to be further legal and policy review, as General Hill had suggested in his memo.
Correct.
And so the next step then was to proceed with a larger general and policy review, which is what I intended to do.
Correct. And not only intended, but you initiated.
I initiated, yes, that's right, Senator. When I learned that Mr. Haynes did not want that broad-based legal and policy review to take place, then I stood down from the plans.
Right. Let's now clarify exactly how you were told to stand down. Was it in writing or was it verbal?
It was not in writing, Senator, and the best of my recollection as to how this occurred is that the chairman called me aside and indicated to me that Mr. Haynes did not want this broad-based review to take place, and that I should not continue to interact with, the chairman's words were not this detailed. It was a very brief meeting where he called me aside and said, Mr. Haynes does not want this process to proceed. However, that did not mean that I then stopped doing all legal analysis or all legal review. I continued to engage with Mr. Haynes' office, and this is the piece that I think is not necessarily been clear, is that when I stopped the analysis that would have included the services and the Defense Intelligence Agency and Fort Huachuca and all of those various agencies, nevertheless, I continued to work with Mr. Haynes' office and with the chairman in terms of reviewing and analyzing General Hill's request. So at that time, there was no perceived need to go to the chiefs and complain about anything, or to the president and complain, or the secretary, because the process was still proceeding, in that I understood that this was a very sensitive issue, that Mr. Haynes wanted this to be held very close hold, and I believed that his prerogative as the chief legal officer of the department was to have his office take the lead. I would provide support to the chairman and work with Mr. Haynes' office.
Well, when he created the final product, what was your professional analysis at that time and advice to the chairman?
Sir, based on the discussions and the interaction that I had had with Mr. Haynes' office, with Guantanamo, with Southcom, I believed that the techniques that the Secretary approved, in the context in which they were discussed and in which he approved them, could in fact be conducted humanely, in accordance with the President's...
Humanely? Is that the word you used?
Yes, Senator, humanely, in accordance with the President's direction that the detainees were to be treated humanely.
And did you feel they were consistent with international and domestic law and other laws of the United States?
If they were conducted consistent with the discussions that we had had in terms of the oversight, the supervision by the commander, with, in fact, supervision by the staff judge advocate, and again, in the context in which they were discussed, and let me explain, if I may, that the removal of clothing was not nudity. There was never a discussion that that would involve nudity. The use of military working dogs was not to have working dogs in an interrogation booth, unmuzzled and snarling at detainees. That's not what the Secretary approved. The use of stress techniques was limited to standing for 4 hours. So when you put all of these factors together with the oversight, with the fact that the President had mandated that the detainees be treated humanely, then I believe that in fact they could be those techniques could be conducted consistent with both international and domestic law.